Welcome to Ahead of the Game, a podcast brought to you by the Digital Marketing Institute. I'm your host, Will Francis, and today I'll be talking to Nikki Lindgren. Nikki's the founder and managing partner of Pennock, a female-led paid media, affiliate marketing and SEO agency focused on helping direct-to-customer, DTC, and e-commerce brands acquire their customers and monetize their businesses. Nikki, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've got lots to ask you about your specific industry, about DTC, direct-to-consumer brands and how you help them. Let's just start with your industry. Why beauty and lifestyle marketing? How did you get into that?
Yes. Well, it was fitting for a girl from a very small town in rural Minnesota. I loved fashion. And so I went to study fashion first, not the design end of it, but the buying and business side of fashion. So I always knew I wanted to work in that industry. And through being in the San Francisco Bay Area at the time, I was, becoming a working adult. There wasn't that much fashion here. There was like Gap, Levi's, but that was about it back in the day. So I started working in home decor, which is where like the lifestyle angle comes through. I was able to work at Pottery Barn Corporate and then Cost Plus World Market. So that kind of led me to really want to corner the market for fashion and lifestyle home decor as an agency. But as my team was maturing and building some of their own relationships, they had an interest and more of a Rolodex in beauty, and here we are. So now I think 70% of our clients have been squarely in the beauty space, of them mainly skincare.
Yeah, I see that. Do you think that's a really good thing to, if there's freelance marketers listening or people aspiring to run or start an agency, do you think it's really good to double down in a very specific niche and just get really good at that?
Yes, I was super reluctant to do it because at the beginning, I was like, I'm growing a business. Like I need a client. It doesn't matter what industry they're in. If they like me, I like them, and I think I can get them results. We'll do the work. But it's become more evident with time that, you actually make an impact. You're more scalable. You're more interesting from a sellable perspective too, if you're trying to get your agency acquired. If you're niching down, I think what some industry experts say is they really evaluate the business related to a core competency or industry, and that's what they evaluate from like a sale price or a acquisition price for the business. And so we're really trying to maintain our foothold in our favorite industry with a little bit of overlap into industries of fashion and lifestyle. And I think like for us, being a digital marketing agency that's helping with performance, like our angle is, well, they're all targeting roughly the same audience. And so we're really good at understanding a core audience, even better if it's a core audience and beauty, but sometimes that core audience is buying fashion and things for their home too. So it still kind of fits into our positioning.
Well, yeah, I mean, I used to run an agency myself, and I found that kind of happens naturally a bit because you do some work for a certain type of brand, and then you use that case study to just go and win more work. And the obvious place to go is more brands in that space, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you've got a higher chance of getting your email replied to or getting the call returned. But so you've gone quite deep down that rabbit hole of beauty, clearly. How does that industry differ in terms of marketing from other industries, do you think?
Oh my gosh, if I only knew what I know now. Well, one, it's very easy for a direct-to-consumer beauty brand to whip up and to launch. It's really easy to buy customers. It's becoming more costly, but I think the biggest surprise was creative. Like creatively, when you have a brand that maybe sells 12 to 24 core products, and maybe a new product every year, maybe every couple of years, you have to reinvent the wheel and find different ways to talk about the unique selling proposition of these 12 to 24 SKUs every single month. So it gets a little bit more complicated to find ways to actually like land and resonate with new audiences when the landscape of the portfolio for that brand isn't changing that much. Juxtaposed with fashion, we're working with brands that have seasonal drops. Sometimes 6 to 8 collections per year. And so with them, we get to just kind of follow what the collection looks like, what creative they're putting forward for their brick and mortar brand or brick and mortar locations, and just like their sell sheet in general. And so there's a lot less of a creative lift and creative thoughts that my team has to come up with when we're working with seasonal collections.
Well, it's true that, isn't it? Because I think in most industries, you could sum marketing up, or the job of marketing as being trying to talk about the same products again and again and again in different, new and interesting ways. And that's a challenge, I think, with most things, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's hard. I don't envy someone who has to think about that every day. It's become the sort of on-trend marketing tactic has been these like pop-ups or brand experiences like brand cafes and stuff. Do you think that's like a flash in the pan fad, or is that kind of thing here to stay?
Well, it's interesting because I would probably just guesstimate it's a fad. However, in talking to brands that are really marketing to younger demographics, like thinking Gen Alpha and younger Gen Z, there is this craving for real in person rather, like gatherings and shopping experiences. And so should that hold for the whole of Gen Alpha and the next generation coming up, I could see brick and mortar having more of a position than it did probably in 2018 or something, right? Where I think we were all just craving digital and growth on digital and didn't care too much about brick and mortar.
What other changes have you seen in beauty and lifestyle over the last few years?
Yeah, I would say, I guess the thing I want to say first is I do feel like people are being more reserved in how they're spending money and just making sure it's with brands that really back into their ethos. Maybe, the idea of buying into limited edition versus this is a mass product that anyone can pick up at their local Walgreens or CVS, I think is a direction we're going in. I think it's very early, so that's probably something that would make more sense to talk about in late 2025, not right now. And then related to how things have evolved with time, I think we've attempted to launch, any new, I think there's trainings you can do online where it's you can launch your own beauty brand in 5 hours, pick what color lipsticks you want and, eye creams versus serums. And you can launch a brand so quickly. But I do think that the interest in that is going to kind of quiet down because it's so hard to make an impact, and you'll be spending money to just buy that customer who's probably not going to be loyal. So those are the things that I think have really driven growth of the industry, or some of the things since the pandemic. And I think that's starting to dry up. I think TikTok Shop might be pointing in the direction of just more mass product consumption. But I think even the consumers are going to be thinking about what they're served on TikTok shops in relation to the ethos of the brand and how it fits with their lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting watching that. What do you think the impact on DTC shopping behavior is of this kind of race to the bottom we see with things like Temu, Shein, TikTok Shop, people seemingly being able to acquire products for phenomenally low prices, but then obviously there's inevitably a mass realization that some of these products aren't that good. Is that having an impact, you think, on your bit of the DTC economy?
I mean, it'd be silly to say that it's not, right? But I do think there's a time and place for everything, and I think people who are really looking for the trends and maybe the black lipstick because it's a thing for a season, sure, they're going to buy that at an affordable price point and maybe care less about the ingredient. But when it comes to everyday product use, I think they're going to be looking for things that are of quality, things that, they're feeling good about making a purchase again. So I buy some things from Zara. I'm not going to pass it down to my daughter because it's not going to be even in operating order by the time she's an adult. But, I will think about my Louis Vuitton for her, right? And like maybe think of buying that as something I can pass on to her. So I think there's just a little bit of an evolution for keeping things longer and like having it passed down from generation to generation than I think we got growing up in our era.
If I had my own beauty products and I said, should I put them on TikTok Shop? What would you say? And would you have any advice for me?
I would say yes. I do think, okay, so when we're talking about efficiencies of spend and efficiencies of finding a new customer, majority of brands are going to do a better job of converting someone on TikTok Shop or Instagram Shop because it's just less friction to convert, right? But the caveat to that is if you're a fashion brand with like 8 colorways and 12 different sizes, like it gets kind of complicated still to shop on TikTok or on Instagram. I'm sure the platforms are going to come up with solutions to make both the brands' workload on that front easier as well as the consumers. But I think when you have like massive variations to a product, it's harder to do on TikTok or Instagram Shop right now. The other caveat I would throw out there is if you are first to market with something new that probably needs a little bit more of an explanation, you want to drive people to the website because they're not going to be ready to buy if they're not really fully grasping what your unique selling proposition is. And the final thing would be price point or demographic. We've worked with brands that have really mature female audiences. We tested TikTok Shop. No surprise, it didn't work super well. They got way better conversions on their website. 1, because they were first to market with something, and 2, their audience was super mature. So, there are corner cases in which like TikTok probably isn't going to convert well.
That's interesting thought about people have to be ready to buy. It needs to be maybe a trending product they've seen talked about elsewhere. They're already quite interested in it. Boom, it's in their feed. It's $10-15, what harm, click buy. But you're right, if it's something that we're not familiar with, we need to do a bit more of that brand building, a bit more storytelling or product education perhaps. And that doesn't really happen on TikTok Shop so much, does it? Do you need to be working with creators to make TikTok Shop and Instagram shopping work?
Yeah, I think you do. Again, if we're talking a year from now, the landscape might look a little different. But I think what is becoming evident is new brands, especially brands launched by millennials, like really don't get TikTok. And so they're probably going to do a bad job in-house of doing their own TikTok. So that would be an example of where you would leverage creators to actually like pull through the story of what you're pushing. And yeah, I mean, there's really not a client that we work with right now where we're not suggesting creators. The instance where we aren't is it's a celebrity dermatologist and she is her creator. So like she doesn't need to include other personalities. She is the personality.
Interesting. And do you have a sort of, I mean, I'm not suggesting it's cookie cutter, but do you have a fairly standard way that you use creators or work with them?
I wouldn't say, like, I feel like so much of what we do is bespoke client by client. So while we have like guardrails and like recommendations, like it's not here's the template, plug it and play it for this brand, even if their AOV average order value is $200 and that other brands is $15, right? So I think finding the lanes of which the creator should operate in, are they more educational, are they more get ready with me before and afters, like figure out those lanes. But ultimately the creators want a lot of creative freedom right now, and so the more scripting you're doing of what the creator needs to say, I think like the worse outcome you're going to get. And I was at an event with Creator IQ the other week, and their data suggests that creators actually want to build a career with brands. They don't want to just get paid $200 here. So I think the more you're bringing them to the table as like a partner of this campaign or effort, the better it's going to be for both parties. And in some ways, it could even be more affordable for the brand because it may not, produce the same level of results, which could be favorable from a cost perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, having worked on influencer marketing quite a bit myself, I think it's such a missed opportunity when it's like one-off engagements and it's just a paid post. If you build a relationship with creators, you can often get sort of accidental mentions or incidental mentions for free. There's more that comes out of it, and that relationship can bear fruit that you can't always predict or put on a spreadsheet.
Right.
You kind of have
Well,
ambassadors, really, don't you?
yeah, exactly. And that is kind of the angle I think all brands aspire to be in, is like, let's find our curated list of partners and let's treat them as ambassadors. But I think like TikTok is going to continue developing new suites of product. And one of the things my team was just training the rest of our team on today is TikTok launched something, I think it's just called TikTok One. It's basically a new creator environment or creative suite of theirs that is free to use. So I think like agencies and brands are going to be able to augment and modify assets at a different level than they were able to with the suite available before. So I think things like that are helping put a little bit more of the control and power back into the brands rather than rely so heavily on these creators. So I'm excited to see how that comes to life.
Yes. I mean, just for clarity for our listeners, do you make any distinction between an influencer and a creator, or is that just a different word for the same thing in your book?
It depends on who you talk to, I think. For me, I would probably position most of the nanos and micros, and I forget, honestly, like since we're not in that space, I forget the definition, but like basically anyone under 10K in followers, I would probably call a creator, and then think about like bucketing the bigger guys as like, they probably want to be called influencers just because they probably feel like they're more established.
Yeah, interesting. So you're right. I mean, what's interesting, of course, is TikTok have had a creator marketplace, and they've got new tools, like say TikTok One. I've not quite had a play with that myself, but they want brands to be able to work with creators there, and that's part of the value that it gives to brands. Instagram have been talking about launching a creator marketplace, so it's like clearly, it's important to the platforms, it's important to brands. But in your book, what is, again, I'm asking you for a oversimplified answer here, but what is the ROI on working with creators? Is it about top of funnel awareness? Is it more about middle of funnel engagement? Or can these people actually drive sales on the day for a brand?
Yeah. Yeah. So the value, in my opinion, but I do run a paid ads agency, so take that with a grain of salt, is after the content is shared organically by the creator, sparking those ads on TikTok is really the recipe for success. So the creator is going to create their content. It's going to post to or point to TikTok Shop so people can convert and they can get their commission. But as the brand then picks it up as an ad and puts more money behind it, that's really where you're going to see the volume play come into place. So one could have a position to just say, like, I want creators to do my awareness because our brand isn't good at captivating interest. Cool. Then that's a totally different play. But I think most of the brands we work with are focused on our return on investment and making sure everything we're doing is profitable. So we usually set up, I would say 95% of our campaign strategies to be conversion as the objective, to be the highest return on ad spend or the lowest customer acquisition cost. And creators and influencers can play in that space really well when you pick up their content and run that as ads.
Interesting. And Spark ads are essentially boosted posts.
Exactly.
Just for listeners, I suppose that would be called a boost on Meta. Yeah, it's interesting. Like one thing that if you see Gary V in social, one thing he bangs on about relentlessly is this idea of organic being a sort of a place for experimentation, and you find out what works and what sticks, and then when you see something take off in the organic, in your organic social media, you then put a slight twist on that and you turn that into an ad. So your organic social is essentially an engine of creative experimentation and optimization to then put money behind ads that you're fairly certain are going to work because you've validated it. What do you think to that idea, and do you employ any of that?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good idea. And that's where I think like us in the agency lane have to be like really careful because of how businesses are evolving and what people need what brands need from their social channels. So if you talk to me in 2020 when I launched this agency, we didn't want to touch organic. We didn't want to give strategies. Maybe if something was taking off, like we'd boost it. but we weren't really involved in what should be ideated on and tested in the organic lane.
Because
Now
it was very
today,
divided, wasn't it? You know, those two
yeah,
sides of social.
it really was. And I think like if I wanted to be a dinosaur and be like, this is where I'm, going to die. Like I want to stay in just paid and it is what it is. But, luckily with some, nudges from the team, like we're crossing that chasm a little bit and connecting the two. So I would agree with what you're saying from Gary Vee. And I do, everything he shares is usually pretty legit and valid. But what we're doing now every single month as we're doing our media plans with our clients is looking at what historically has worked well for them, both organic and paid, and then like what we want to raise our hand and pick up for paid for sure from their organic side, and also like ideating on those new tests they should be doing in really both lanes. But for new emerging brands, like you have to launch all the content organic first and pick it up as ads. Like you just don't have room not to, because you need proof that what you share organically is going to gain traction. And the only way for it to look like it gains traction is to spend money on it.
Interesting. That is very interesting. I could ask you so many questions about that. There's a perception, people who talk to me, I find, have a perception that the cost of social paid ads has gone up, but the efficacy and the ROI hasn't. I think that's just a narrative that sort of embedded itself, certainly during the pandemic, because, the cost per click did rise. What are you finding? What's been the trend in the last couple of years in terms of the cost of social ads?
Brands are really reluctant to like change their strategy. Like I spend 60% on Meta and I spend 40% on Google, and maybe I'll do a little bit elsewhere. And so what we're trying to do is like a holistic ad agency that can run ads wherever, is really figure out if we should be testing like Pinterest or TikTok, or some cases programmatic, more heavily. Those are like our three next major platforms after Google and Meta. So rather than just like, your customer is an aging demographic, we should be on Meta. It is what it is. Let's just keep going. We'll come up with those creative strategies for testing into other channels so we can be a little less reliant on whatever is starting to show signs of fatigue for the client.
Interesting. What's the most overlooked paid channel in your opinion?
Ooh, well, I'll say one, and people might chuckle, but Reddit. Reddit is a really good place to run efficient ads. And because of all the subreddits and communities there, people are very passionate about what they're talking about on Reddit. And often the average Redditor is not overlapping that much with traditional social media. So it's a good way to get your audience, but maybe your audience that isn't seeing you anywhere else.
I really agree with that, because like seriously, when was the last time you heard someone talking about their Reddit ad campaign? People just don't talk about it. They're not thinking about it. And it's plainly obvious that you can put yourself right in the middle of very specific communities.
Yeah.
And I've played with it a little bit, and the product's very easy to use.
Yeah.
I think they've done quite a good job on that, but it just doesn't get thought about, doesn't get considered at all, does it really?
I feel like when we have traditionally more like male audiences, it'll come up from time to time. And if we're launching something new that already has a ton of subreddits, like topics about it, then sure. But yeah, it gets like 2% of our yearly budgets.
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? People think, it's just, if it was like something about crypto or something, people are like, maybe Reddit, but it's, again, I think the channels get so stereotyped and characterized, like, it's all kids on TikTok, and it's all, guys who don't go out much on Reddit and stuff. And these things just patently aren't true, are they, as we know?
Right.
In fact, with paid, I always think it's worth giving any platform a try, at least with a sort of small experimental budget.
I agree.
You talk about programmatic. In fact, you almost talked about it there like a channel. Just explain that to me and to our listeners. What do you actually mean by programmatic?
Yeah, so when I throw programmatic out like that, it's working on a platform like Trade Desk or Basis or Amobi to basically input the data of your demographic. I think one of the good things about programmatic is because of their third-party list buying and some of the ways in which they aggregate data, you can get to more granular audiences through programmatic. And then once you're live on one of those platforms, you can, in many cases, run audio, video campaigns, even like connected TV over the top. But most of our brands are doing video display campaigns or display, just straight up static display campaigns. I think in my opinion, one of the best values for programmatic is native or contextual placements, where if I'm selling a hair regrowth serum and I get to show up in articles about thinning hair, then that's, I've got a captive audience who obviously is dealing with what this article is about, therefore would be interested in my product. And so that's usually how we recommend it for that, like, in-market awareness plays, people who are engaging with content about the topic of the product.
Right. So it's basically high relevant in context advertising.
Yeah.
In places like, could be articles, could it be other things? Could it be in apps or other kinds of websites? Or
yes, absolutely. We like to exclude apps as much as possible because we know there are oftentimes people who click on ads without any intention of doing it.
True.
So we try to exclude app placements, but anything that's sort of like relevant. So if it's, hair regrowth, it's probably going to be in, like, here in the US, like Goop or Pure Wow or Poosh. Those are like kind of mainstream, placements in which people are reading about industry and, replacements.
And you mentioned that they would be in-market audiences, meaning that they are literally in the market. They are doing things, or they're in places that would suggest they are actively seeking out a solution to a problem.
Right.
And that's, I suppose, the kind of smart bit of programmatic, isn't it? It's not just showing it to men of a certain age. It's seeking out people who are giving off signals that they are actively trying to solve the problem that the product solves. Oh, that's smart. That's interesting. What sort of, what proportion of your advertising is going towards that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I would say, like, guesstimate, probably like 15 to 20% of what we manage within a year goes to that channel. So it's not a super large percentage, but I do think when it's activated well, it does perform, especially from a remarketing perspective. But I think, like, again, maybe similar to the Reddit example, is like, oftentimes when you find someone reading an article about hair loss in Pure Wow, they may not be the person who's, like, watching TikTok videos, right? So it's just a good way to, like, get them when they're hot and ready to buy, and ones you may not see on those other traditional social channels.
Yeah. How do you deal with attribution? I know it's probably not a question you love hearing, because I don't think anybody's got a perfect answer to this one, but I'm curious to know, just at the coalface, how do you deal with the fact that when you report back to clients, they go, well, Google drove all the sales and those Instagram ads didn't do a lot, so why are you spending money on those? Or, for instance, whereas, we all know that it's a relay race, and there's a funnel. How do you explain that to clients?
It's hard. I wish I had, like, the perfect response there. I would say, showcasing the brands, and, like, brands that have been around for a while, marketers who've been around for a while, like, they know what they're getting into. They understand that there is going to be a ton of overlap and who's counting, the results and the wins. But I think it's those new brands that have been started by founders in, like, different industries that really don't get how email plus paid plus whatever else doesn't equal the total. It's way greater than the total. So I think a few ways we try to, like, simplify it, which sometimes people hate too, is we think about marketing efficiency ratio. So we'll do total revenue to site divided by spend, and kind of keep a gauge on that, make sure it's a profitable MER. And that allows us to have a little bit more freedom to figure out how much we should do versus awareness versus remarketing, where sometimes when we're locked into a return on ad spend game or a most efficient customer acquisition cost game, we get, kind of pigeonholed into doing a lot more remarketing than we want to because of the efficiency. So I think it's a win-win to go after MER and just like track that along with all the week over week metrics we are with brands. But some brands hate it because it's like, how could you say my MER is a symptom of what you're doing? Because it's just, a view of the whole business. So the longer story is like obviously working with a Triple Wheel or a North Beam or some good MMM product is beneficial. It's just a lot of the smaller brands we work with can't afford another couple $1,000s a month for attribution solution.
Do you find that you get, for instance, a social channel that drives a lot of views but not conversions, and then it's down the funnel with the Google ads or somewhere else that's more conversion focused, so you get this kind of very uneven distribution of conversions between the channels? Is that actually happening?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a real example. We had a client whose business was new but already in a state of decline, and so they were panicked, and they're like, well, we think we think platform data is overstating everything. And we're like, yes, of course it is. And they're like, let's go to GA4 as our source of truth. And so we went from, platform ROAS of like 6-7x return on ad spend of every $1 spend, $6 or $7 in return to 0.3. And then they're like, holy cow, stop spending, stop doing everything because this is inefficient. Which led to further decline of the business. And like, we were just in this position where my team wasn't able to kind of like get us out of the hole and speak to them in a way that aligned with their business needs. And so it, ultimately ended the relationship with them to look at this last click data in GA4, which was unfavorable and kind of an unfair view of what digital marketing and paid ads is supposed to do for a business anyway. So when we haven't come through as good strategic partners for brands and we've allowed them to kind of like tell us how we should be doing things, it has become a huge stopping point in the relationship.
Interesting. Yeah. It is hard, isn't it? Because ultimately there is some level of leap of faith because you can't prove everything. You can't prove the effect every dollar had.
Yeah.
I think some people maybe outside of marketing think that everything's trackable now, and there's something wrong if you can't track everything and report everything. But I
mean, it's going to get worse with like the changes in all the privacy policies and stuff coming out here in the States, at least, right? So like it's going to get cloudier, not clearer, and that's why like starting in 2022, I think we positioned our brands for MER as one of the main KPIs we'll look at and we'll track with brands. And sometimes if their return on ad spend dips, but their MER is consistent, we're like, cool, we're monitoring it, but we're not taking action yet because your business is still super healthy. So, I think it's just like really establishing that trust in the relationship and trust in the strategy and process. And there are some times that you just can't crack the code and find the win. I would say like another thing to keep in mind, it is a good idea to compare 7-day attribution on Meta versus 1-day attribution compared to like GA4 attribution. But in addition to that, keep an eye on your lag time in GA4 and your path length, because I think that's the other thing we get to point out to brands is like, well, of course, our awareness campaign on TikTok drove a really inefficient GA4 return on ad spend. And that's because your brand usually takes 4 days to get someone to convert and 6 touch points. And so like to just say GA4 attribution is going to like properly count that is it's even a little ridiculous to say out loud, right? Like, of course, GA is going to favor Google ads over everything else.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Just for listeners, in case they don't know, that there is this part of Google Analytics where you can see where possible, where it's possible, you can see the path that people have been on towards purchase, the visits they've made to your website before they purchased, and where those visits originated from. So you might see that someone visited from Instagram, and then 3 days later they visited from LinkedIn, and 5 days later they visited from a Google ad, and that all gets sort of amalgamated into a report an overview, and you can talk about conversion lag, and that's the amount of time between them first landing on your website and then actually making the sale. And it is good to point that out. But again, there's a whole missing piece of that, because there might have been weeks and months before all of that where they didn't come to the website, but they were seeing the ads and they were quietly thinking to themselves, I would like that product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can't track
Or they
that.
start following you on social and, you
Yeah.
know, there's so many things that contribute to the sale. It's a little overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. Um, so what about the DTC direct to consumer space? Is it all B2C, or is there a
That's
B2B side to that?
Yeah, that's a fair question. We do work with brands, or we're doing a little bit of B2B. But I would just say, yeah, direct to consumer could be B2B direct to consumer. So an example could be like an application for your business or like a SaaS
Mm,
product.
yeah,
One could just go to, I think an example would be, Notion or something and convert, right? That would be a
yeah,
direct to customer, likely B2B customer. So that does exist. We do not support it that much. Our brands that are in a lane of needing help with B2B, it's usually for like a lead play, and it's because they sell products not only to consumers like the two of us, but also to salons or estheticians or
yeah, yeah.
something for back bar in their practice. So then we'll help them close those orders as well.
And well, how's that different in terms of marketing?
Yeah. Well, I think many of the brands we work with that are in the product space have some sort of qualification and a bit of a process to become a partner of theirs on the B2B side. So in that
Right.
case, we're mainly doing lead conversion, or like oftentimes they have like a protocol and there's a training or something other than a product. So that's the difference. Like the customer acquisition cost can be a lot higher. The time delay between first becoming a lead and then converting can be, 60, 70 days. So a lot of it's not as trackable because the consideration purchase and like the MQL to SQL in terms of like them moving along their B2B purchase journey can be so slow compared to
Yeah,
consumer, direct to consumer.
it can. Yes. Um, I have to ask you about AI. I'm afraid.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
what effect has it had on your business?
Yeah. I think the pro is when we're using it right, we're finding ways to shortcut we're a full female team, so we call it woman hours,
Hmm.
against initiatives, right? So, ideating things, coming up with first pass and drafts of like ad copy directions, etc. Great for using it that way. I think where it's become a little bit of a, not really problem, an opportunity really is there are so many AI media buying products out there now that oftentimes our smaller brands are like, okay, well, your minimum retainer is X, or I
Hmm.
could go use this AI model for $900 a month. And why wouldn't I just do that? It's cheaper and it's AI. It should be better. And
Hmm.
then, they go off and do that. And oftentimes will come back a quarter later and be like, whoops, we tried it, it didn't work. So that makes us feel good. But I imagine AI media buying is going to just get better and better too. So we test out new platforms that do, or retest platforms that do AI media buying occasionally to see if they're better than us. And at the point at which they become better than us, we will start employing them as part of our service too.
Yeah, I mean they will definitely get better, but
Mhm.
where do you think that you will add value in that world where they get much better?
Yeah, I think the value add, we're positioning ourselves to be our strength and our core competency is both strategy around where and how to fight the campaigns and
Hmm.
the creative side of things. So what we create a brief our clients every month on the new assets we need from them for next month's initiatives. So I think more of the strategic partnership. And then ultimately, like brands that are spending a couple 100,000 a month on ads, they have more complex buys. So I think there will always be a place for an agency partner there. It's just for the smaller clients who are just emerging, where we'll lean much more heavily into not the actual doing, but the strategy and the thinking behind it.
Yeah. What impact is it having on your clients? So the brands in the beauty and lifestyle space.
Yeah, I think the impact is probably having on them is hopefully they're all feeling, I haven't like, surveyed them on this, but I hope they're feeling like more opportunity because I think there's a lot more going on with like virtual try-on, color matching,
Yeah.
efficacy of products, etc. So I think that there's just more for them to do with it. But I do think our brands are overwhelmed. There's like no shortage of opportunity for them to do more things. So I think it's helping them prioritize what part of the AI could add value for them getting the conversion faster is really another place we could add some value.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that will play out. Like, so TikTok launched this thing called Symphony
Mm-hmm.
recently, and haven't fully played with it, but essentially it's AI generated imagery, collateral, basically around your products, and your
Mm-hmm.
definitely would be relevant to your kind of client, I think. But I think it just remains to be seen how palatable that is to the consumer.
Right.
I think inevitably with these things there'll be a slight overstepping and then a slight knee-jerk reaction. The consumer doesn't want that, but then some
Mm-hmm.
sort of middle ground, some happy medium probably where it is useful, but it's not sufficiently repellent to the
Right.
consumer. Doesn't put them off in some way.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see how that plays out and what people's comfort level is for AI generated ads and content and creators
Right. I know.
using those
It's
products.
it's going to be a different landscape, that's for sure. I'm not sure I'm personally ready for non-real people trying to sell me products.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is, to be honest with you. Okay, well, as it's nearing the end of the year, I'd love to ask you what are the trends that you see coming in your space in marketing in 2025?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is, kind of going full circle to where we started is the community feeling that one gets by participating with the brand, by purchasing from the brand, how aligned it is with their core values as individuals. So I think that's going to be huge in coming years just because of, the state we're all living in now. So that would be the first thing that plays out for me. And then I think in the growth marketing landscape, I do think there's going to be more machine learning based campaigns that do continue doing more of the heavy lifting. So I'm thinking about on Meta, there's Advantage Plus shopping campaigns. On Google, there's Performance Max campaigns. So they're
Yeah,
much easier for people to maintain than ad campaigns of the past. So I think there will be more developments in that lane that will be beneficial for brand owners. And then I mean, it's a content game, right? Like, I think the amount of effort, team size, etc., brands are going to be putting into content creation is just going to continue to, amplify and explode. Yeah. So one other trend that I would hit on is the amount of fractional CMOs and marketing directors we're working with, I think,
mm,
is already large. And I think as brands are emerging, and they have a need, but not necessarily a full-time headcount need, it's a really smart way to start scaling the business because I think like an agency partner, a fractional CMO has so much more on their plate and, more to pull from in terms of strengths and weaknesses of other initiatives that they've tested. So I
yeah.
do think continuing to dial into fractional workers is going to be a great thing for brands to do as they're growing up and establishing themselves.
And do you
Related,
think that brands and agencies will continue to lean on remote talent?
it depends on the type of agency. So I
Mm,
think anything that's creative and like needs studio production, like, no, they're not going to be able to do that. But I do think most of the agency workers I know at this point are fully remote.
mm,
And I don't see that for like social media agency, email agency, etc. I don't think that there will be any change in that. Um, I think the younger generation, if these are agencies mainly catching people when they're fresh out of school,
yeah,
it doesn't seem like that generation really wants to be in person yet. So
yeah.
until that changes, I think remote is a beneficial way to do it.
Mm. And what skills do you think are going to be most important as we head into 2025 in marketing?
Yeah, I think the data analysis, someone who's really good with data and identifying the trends of the business's own data, in addition to kind of being cutting edge of actual trends going on in the marketplace beyond their four walls, is going to be important. And then beyond that, I think social and creative against social and content is going to be where our brand should be investing the most.
Just one last thing to ask you. Where can our listeners connect with you and find more out about you online?
Yes, you can find the links to all of our social profiles on our website. We're pennock.co, not .com. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me and pick my brain more about our lane of expertise, I'm just email away, nikki@pennock.co. And so welcome anyone reaching out for a quick audit or feedback on how I would approach the coming season, coming year in terms of stacking up marketing initiatives.
Cool. That's really great. Thanks so much, Nikki. Look, that's been really, really interesting talking to you. I feel like I've learnt loads, and I'd love to talk to you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Will.